Hi everyone, I'm Ashish Surani. I am the tax and regulatory partner at Parakram Legal.
Hi, I'm Janisha Parekh, the corporate and regulatory partner at Parakram Legal.
So, as part of our knowledge initiative, we are happy to present our FEMA knowledge series, where we will be discussing some practical issues that we see day to day on the Indian Exchange Control Law of India.
Yes, so let's get started. I think, Ashish, first let's get started with a very basic question. What is FEMA and who should really be concerned about this law, right?
So, I think when it comes to FEMA, when you are dealing with a person in a foreign country, I think that is where FEMA becomes relevant. But I think what is the most important aspect here is that there should be a transaction that should happen with India. And the moment there's a transaction that is happening with India, we should evaluate whether FEMA is applicable or not. Uh, what
Mm-hmm.
what happens is that people think that only if there is money involved does FEMA become
Yeah,
applicable.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a very common pitfall that we've seen, right? And I think, as Ashish was saying, that if India is involved, right, the parties may be outside India, but even if India is involved, that's when FEMA is relevant. So, and a natural corollary of that is in transactions, there might not be a fund flow in India or outside India, right? But if it still involves or it has nexus with India, it does merit an evaluation from a FEMA perspective. Ashish, any examples of what these transactions might be, which people sort of think that FEMA shouldn't really apply because there's no fund flow, but actually FEMA may apply.
yeah. So I think let's take an example of where an Indian resident individual is perhaps receiving shares without consideration. Let's assume it's a gift from a non-resident. Now, in that situation, just because there is no money flow, will FEMA not apply? Definitely not. We must evaluate whether FEMA is applicable in this situation or not. Uh, there could be many other examples, right, where you are receiving shares, like I said, out of a gift, or it could be you transferring shares to a third party who is in a foreign country, which could be by way of a gift. In both situations, FEMA must be evaluated, and only then should you make that transaction. Again, the threshold, the yardstick cannot be whether money is going outside India or coming into India. It is a transaction that needs to be evaluated at a holistic level.
Yeah, that's true. I think some of the common ones we've seen where people have missed evaluation of FEMA is classic ones being buying shares of the foreign company, right? Ashish gave the gift example. A lot of times people acquire shares of the foreign company through sweat equity, ESOP, IP transfer, and very different things without really evaluating the FEMA compliances. I think some of the other transactions which we've seen slip in this regard are if a resident is transferring shares to another resident of an offshore company. Again, out there, the concept is that, hey, it's a domestic transaction. Why is FEMA involved? But actually, you are dealing with the shares of an offshore company, and hence FEMA becomes
Yeah,
relevant.
exactly. So that's the
Yeah.
point, right? There's a transaction that is taking place with India. Now, in this situation, you would think the money is moving from one Indian bank account to the other Indian bank account, and therefore, why should their FEMA become applicable, right? But actually, FEMA does become applicable because, unfortunately, there is foreign share company involved.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just taking a cue from this discussion, let's generically discuss some of the common pitfalls and the common mistakes we've seen parties make in cross-border transactions.
Sure, I think you mentioned one. I'll just give a quick brief on that. Is basically when you're acquiring shares of a foreign company without consideration. Now, what happens is that Indian residents usually contact a service provider outside India, and they set up a company outside India where technically they are the shareholders, subscribers to the memorandum of association,
Yeah.
and the payment is made directly to the service provider under current account transaction, and
Yeah.
therefore there is no capitalization directly into the company, and you have set up a company. Now, technically, this is a transaction that requires you to go to your AD bank and fill out the relevant forms and get your unique identification number for the foreign company.
Yeah.
This is a very, very common issue and common pitfall that people face, and
Yeah.
almost every third person is seeing to set up a company outside India but does not follow the relevant
Yeah.
documentation and the process around it.
Yeah, and I think ODI rules are very clear that if you're subscribing to the memorandum, that is also an ODI, and
Absolutely.
hence you need to get your UIN and do your filings. I think what we've also seen is, in simple import export transactions, payment timelines are not adhered to. There are transfer of receivables, but without again considering the FEMA aspect, and especially for startups, one of the common issues which we come across is, they're just raising funds. It's a small check, and it might be an angel investment funding that they're getting. So there might be money coming in from NRIs outside India. Now, if that NRI is not using their domestic money or the NRO account, and they're using the offshore account to, fund the Indian company, there is little or no evaluation of whether is this company allowed to take this foreign investment in the first place, right? So FEMA governs and provides for sectoral guidelines. So depending on which sector the company falls into, it needs to accordingly see whether does it require a governmental approval, is it under the automatic route, what are the conditions it needs to comply with. This is a very common diligence issues, especially in early stage startups where FEMA evaluation is not really done.
Yeah, so I think, Janisha, on that, I think one issue that I keep hearing of is basically when a startup is taking money from a non-resident and
Mm.
whether they should be characterized as a single brand or a multi-brand retail, right? I think, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think what happens is a lot of startups, especially in the new age sector, they might have a marketplace model, and so they may categorize themselves as e-commerce marketplace company where 100% foreign investment is permitted. But what people usually fail to consider is the conditionalities. For example, a e-commerce marketplace cannot own the inventory. If you do, there are risks of miscategorization into some other prohibited sector, and of course non-compliance with the conditions associated with marketplace e-commerce. So these nuances are usually overlooked. Some of the other interesting cases of categorization from an FDA perspective involve fintech companies. Would you call yourself as falling within the information technology sector? Would you call yourself again as an e-commerce marketplace, or would you call yourself as other financial services, whether regulated or non-regulated by RBI? Depending on which bucket you fall under, whether you are allowed to take the foreign investment in the first place or not, it's going to be determined accordingly.
Yeah, so many reasons why we should evaluate FEMA, right, in all
Exactly,
of these
exactly,
transactions.
exactly.
Right, right. I think moving on to our last aspect for today's discussion, I
Mm-hmm.
think which is again very relevant and people often have these questions, is basically the residency test under FEMA. And while Jinsha, you could talk a little bit on what is the residency under FEMA, maybe I could give a flavor on tax. So why don't you
Yeah,
go for it?
yeah, and super relevant a lot for our NRI clients as well. So, as such, with respect to residency under FEMA, if we have to determine the residency of a person as on date, you have to look at whether the person in the previous financial year was staying in India for more than 182 days or not. So, for example, if one has to determine Janisha's residency as on November 2025, whether Janisha is a person resident in India or outside India, then you need to see whether Janisha was staying in India for more than 182 days in FY 2024 to 2025. Let's assume the answer is in the affirmative. Yes, Jenny Shah was staying for more than 182 days in the last financial year. Then she is a person resident in India. If not, she will be considered as a person resident outside India. However, let's say in the last financial year, Jenny Shah was staying for more than 182 days in India, but as of November 2025, she plans to move abroad. She is moving abroad and for employment and for an uncertain duration, not like a fixed, project based assignment or something of that sort, which has a return ticket. She is going for an indefinite period, right? So in that case, even though Janisha was staying in India for more than 182 days in the previous financial year, she should be considered as a person resident outside India as of November 2025, because now she is moving out of India for purpose of employment and for an uncertain period.
Sure. So,
Yeah,
Jinsha, you talk about employment and uncertain period together. Now, can't it be that I am going outside India without employment but still for an uncertain period?
absolutely. Absolutely. You might be going outside India for an uncertain period for any reason, right? And it is a purely fact specific exercise
Sure.
where you need to demonstrate that uncertainty, right? And I think your paperwork is important in that regard, where you're recording as to why is it that you're going outside India.
Sure.
If there are any correspondences where you can record the same. For example, if you're going for employment, you have your employment, or for any other reason you're going outside India, you have some documentary evidence. It's good to have it. Some of the other things what people do is they convert their rupee account into an NRO account, which is done when you change your residency. So that again, sort of buttresses your claim that you're changing your residency. So there's no hard and fast rule. It's a pure fact specific exercise where you need to prove your intent. You need to show that your intent is to stay outside India for an uncertain period of time. Yeah.
Sure, sure. No, that's very good to know. I think from an Indian tax perspective, the test is basically 100% physical day count test,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
if you are staying in India, if you're physically present in India, I think that is how your residency will be calculated. I'm of course not going to go into the specifics
Yeah.
and get into technicals with respect to how the number of days are calculated, but it's a pure physical presence test, and
Yeah.
that's what has to be looked at,
Yeah.
which is quite different from an intention based test, where if you're able to show your intent to stay outside India or in India, then you
Right.
become a non-resident resident. Very
Right.
useful, Denisha. I think there has been some case law around
Yes.
residency on under FEMA, and usually there are very few cases on this aspect. But it would be good to know what is the recent case law around it
Right.
and what does it say.
Right. So interestingly, you had the appellate authority at SAFEMA who has delivered an order in August 2025, just 2-3 months ago, on this matter. So the person, the petitioner in that situation, had come back to India for good in May 2012, and after that they had acquired agricultural property in India, and that's where the whole issue came up. So while evaluating the residency of this individual, the tribunal held that while in the previous financial year, the person had stayed for more than 182 days outside India, right? So even though when he came back in May 2012, and he bought the property subsequently in the year 2012, his residency remained unchanged because in the previous financial year he was staying for more than 182 days outside India. So in that order, the intention to come back into India, which was reflected May 2012 onwards, was not factored in. The way the tribunal interpreted that was that the intention also has to be in the previous financial year. So let's say in the previous financial year he was for more than 182 days outside India, but he came back in India for good, which showed his intention to stay in India, but in the previous financial year only in that case he could have been considered to be a person resident inside
Sure. So I
in
think what
India.
you're what
Yeah.
you're trying to say is that basically, if we were to go, or rather, if you were to look at the definition under FEMA, then that individual was able to buy the agricultural land in May 2012 without any problem, because he was staying in India he had come to India for an uncertain period of time, and therefore a resident. But the tribunal held that the uncertainty should also be read along with his number of days in the previous year.
Yeah.
Very interesting
Yeah.
to know. But any thoughts on this judgment? Do you think that we are on the right track with this judgment, or do you think otherwise?
No, while it's a very interesting legal interpretation, I think strictly going by how the law is worded, the financial year test is different, and the intent test sort of trumps it. That's how the language of the law reads. So it would be interesting to see if this order is further appealed at a higher appellate authority, and it's interpreted that we as practitioners typically interpreted that intention is not to be determined with the previous financial year test. It's independent of it. So yeah, I think definitely goes a lot against how it's practically implemented, and so it's going to be interesting to see if this is further appealed.
Sure, sure. I think good luck to the individual wanting to buy agricultural land here in India. But on that note, I think we're going to close this for today. I
Yeah.
think thank you everyone for listening to us. I hope
Yeah.
you gained some knowledge. And when we hope to deliver some more of these interesting,
The next coming
yeah, in
few
the next
weeks.
coming few weeks. I think we're going to talk a little bit about capital and current account transactions, ODI, FDI, some issues that we continuously see. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching us. Have a
Yeah,
good
and see
time.
you
Thank
soon.
you. See you soon.
Thank you.